So thanks very much really for the opportunity to talk today at the Martin House Research Centre conference about my PhD really, which explores the use of social media by young men with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And where I've only got 10 minutes, this is going to very much be sort of a whistle stop tour through sort of 3 and a bit, 4 years worth of work. But I really want to try and focus as much as I can on the findings of the study, so I'll get to those as quickly as possible. So the aims and objectives of the study really were to explore the lived experience of social media from the perspective of young men with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And I really wanted to keep a very much sort of an open approach to that aim. And really, my focus really was on lived experience and really the role of social media in their everyday lives and what it means to them from an everyday point of view, what motivates them and why they actually interact with it. Now, briefly, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy is a life-limiting neuromuscular condition that results in muscle weakness and loss. Until relatively recently, life expectancy was sort of in the mid to late teens. However, more recently, developments in care planning such as gastronomy feeding and ventilation equipment has meant that these young men now live into sort of their 30s and 40s, and if not beyond. And so certainly absolutely transitioning into adulthood and should be expected to live independent, relatively independent adult lives. But really my focus was actually on actually where social media fits into their daily existence. And so really, because my focus on lived experience, I really from the start adopted a phenomenological perspective. So I was interested in actually what does the meaning of social media mean to them? Where does that meaning come from? Clearly it's derived from their lived experiences, their everyday encounter. And also that interaction was very much interpretive. It was between me trying to work out and understand what their everyday interaction looked like with social media and then trying to tell that to me. And so from a methodology point of view, interpretive phenomenological analysis really sort of lent itself very well to that epistemology and that way of thinking. And then from a recruitment point of view, really, I focused on a very small sample. I was quite keen from the start to do that. So I recruited 8 young men from both Martin House Hospice and online via Twitter to engage with the study. And they engaged through sort of sequential in-depth interviewing. So some of the participants just engaging with one interview, others sort of up to 3 or 4 interviews. Really exploring their lived experience of social media, what it means to them, what's its placement, why is it important to them. And on that note, it's also important to discuss actually what I mean by social media. And I was quite keen to not put a strict definition onto that, to really talk about and think about really, well, what does the term mean to them? And in doing that, really, that provided really invaluable insight into the types and platforms of social media that were of most importance to them by way of actually what they discussed. So for instance, video gaming came out as an incredibly important platform of social media that previous I might not have acknowledged or thought about as a type of social media, but for them and the participants I spoke to, it was a really integral component. And I also did things like sort of a video gaming with them during an interview, which was really, really interesting and led some really interesting insights into sort of the meaning of social media to them and how that was reflected through what they did online. And I think that can be best sort of summarised, and the findings of this research can be best summarised with this diagram, which essentially depicts 2 worlds, the offline world of these young men and their offline world, and how constantly these 2 worlds interacted with one another. So in a sense, what was going on offline influenced what happened online, and also more so influenced the meaning of that online interaction. And I'll go on to try, if I've got time, discuss about that in a bit more depth. And in the centre of that circle, the different types of what I sort of term the essential components of the lived experience of social media. So the components that really, when I was doing the analysis and when I was writing up the findings, really sort of came through and was most sort of integral to the lived experience. And the first of those was this notion of escapism, this ability to shut out, go beyond, and go elsewhere. And it was a layered sort of meaning when we're talking about escapism. For some, it was very much straightforward. I like to video game because I can go somewhere else. I can switch off. I can forget. For others, it was a lot more than that. It was more of an embodied escapism, and this notion of going beyond what the body can do offline to engaging with activities that are available to them online. And that ranged from everything from sort of driving to horse riding, to being a mixed martial artist, to even sort of washing themselves. It's this idea that actually what to me was on the front of it quite a mundane activity, and really to video game development, I think, well, that isn't something we might consider as a really important activity. Actually, what these young men were saying to me, and what came out from the study, was that these are really important activities and really important, meaningful activities. And so when we're going forward with sort of video game development, for instance, we really must take into account the importance of sort of role-playing games and how important they are to this sort of population. And that lends itself to another essential component, was this idea of self-presentation and disclosure, the ability that these young men had control over that disclosure and control over that presentation. So offline, for instance, a lot of them spoke about pointing, staring, offensive remarks, that sort of thing. And whereas online, they sort of said, well, I can develop who I want to be and show who I want to be, and I have control over that. So, for instance, something really important to me is that I'm a gamer, and so I can really show that to other people online without them seeing the fact that I'm in a wheelchair, or there's a perceived difference, so to speak, that absolutely isn't there, but can often be preconceived by others as existing. And going on from that was this notion of autonomy and support, this idea that online there was a real sense of control, that I had more control over my life, and that I could search for things, I could do things, and I could find out information about things like my condition, rather than being told from my parents or my healthcare professionals, and that doing that was actually much more easier to process. And from a support perspective, the ability to go on Facebook, for instance, and go on a Facebook closed group around Duchenne's and meet other people with similar lived experiences was actually really important. One interesting findings around that actually was not that it was important from an emotional point of view, but actually it was far more informational, far more practical. The idea that you can go and source information yourself and about things like ventilator equipment and give that information across as well was a real core motivation for engagement with social media. Previously focusing on young people with life-limiting conditions in general, has looked upon sort of things like blogging, for instance, for a form of sort of legacy making associated with sort of end of life. And one of the interesting things to come out from this study was that actually social media engagement was very much about the here and now. The idea that everything I'm doing online is to improve my everyday being now. The people I see online, people who I might be inspired by, are inspiring me to live in the present and not actually think about what lies ahead in the future. And that's probably very reflective of the fact now that these sort of young men are very much transitioning into adulthood and are very much expected to live relatively independent, if properly catered for, adult lives. And so that was reflective online in terms of how they spoke about different types of social media too. Another idea was this notion of self-reflection, another essential component. And this sort of arose from the fact that young men found reflection in a lot of the characters and the avatars they came to embody through video gaming. It made them think existentially about actually what might life look like if I could do the things I can do online. And so again, there's this very much a nice interchangeable interaction between the offline world and their online world that were constantly infusing the meaning that they sort of associated with social media. And a bit sort of separate from that, but again, a very much an essential component was this notion of catharsis. And so it was interesting actually that, there's a bit of literature around, the use of support groups. We sometimes think that maybe we need to bring young men with Duchenne's together to talk about the condition, all that sort of stuff. And that's actually doing that is very therapeutic. And that really might be the case, but certainly for the 8 young men I spoke to, it was more through sort of things like video gaming and actually, I suppose, the physical interaction, the frantic tapping of a button replicated through, the punching of a bag on a boxing video game, for instance, that helped to release some of the sort of notions of frustration, stress and anger that develop themselves in the sort of offline world, really. And again, you can see that those two interactions occurring. And then onto this idea of accessibility. And first and foremost, accessibility was meant in the sense of being able to reach or enter something. So a lot of the participants who video games spoke about this worry and this anxiety that actually eventually I might not be able to access that world as much as I'd like, and that this was sort of experienced very much sort of daily and gradually. So sometimes it would develop into being to the point where I can't press both joysticks on my controller, or that I've witnessed a friend go from being an incredibly good gamer to someone who can't game at all. And actually, what does that mean for me? And when we spoke about different options about actually how can we support you to continue to video game, they're really sort of keen to put across this point that actually this isn't one fix. There are controllers out there now. There are charities like Special Effects that do wonderful things in terms of allowing people with Duchenne's and different sort of disabilities to continue to video game. But actually, it needs sort of one-to-one consultancy to sit down and really figure out actually how can we help you with that. And then this sort of final aspect of accessibility was this notion actually about the offline online, and really whenever this offline world is not accessible, and by that I mean when I can't do things like go shopping or go to the gym or go to a nightclub or do all those things that I want to do to meet other people. When I can't do all those things, then video gaming holds so much more meaning to me, and social media holds so much more meaning to me. And really, if life could be a bit different, and if I could do the things, if life offline could be as accessible as I'd want it to be, then maybe I wouldn't video game so much, and maybe I wouldn't be so reliant on it as something I do. In sort of some of the quotes sort of portray this idea from getting up and then going to bed, sort of a daily encounter. And so really, in conclusion, that was very much sort of a whistle-stop tour through my study and the findings, and I hope to be able to discuss them a bit more with you when I do the 3-minute presentation and talk about it more in depth then. But I want to conclude really with the main message for me, which was that really social media is at its most harmonious, and the meaning of social media is at its harmonious when it's a place really to enjoy, to connect, to discover, and a place for occasional refuge. But for that all to happen, young men with Duchenne's need to be correctly signposted towards it, need to be correctly supported to use it, and also really importantly that it isn't a replacement for inadequate care offline. And really that while a lot of these young men who I spoke to really value their social media in their daily lives, they also really felt that life could be a lot better offline, and really that it isn't a replacement, it's just something that I do because life offline doesn't give me what I wanted to give. And so thank you very much. That was just, like I say, a very brief sort of 10-minute presentation of my thesis, and I hope to discuss it with you in further depth on the day.